Hi everyone, I am Dharani, working at ENH iSecure as a senior IAM engineer. In this presentation, we are going to see about SailPoint Identity Now event triggers. So the agenda is about introduction to event triggers, types of event triggers, available event triggers, implementation of event triggers, and filtering events. In this slide, let's have an understanding of what is event triggers and how Identity Now support to integrate it. Event triggers is an extensibility feature released by SailPoint which enables us to integrate Identity Now with third-party applications. In SailPoint, any action is performed like account aggregation, account creation, source deletion, which are called as an events. Based on these events, we can perform any new action called event trigger. Based on the different events, SailPoint provides the different event triggers to perform action in Identity Now. Here in this diagram, we see if any changes occurred in SailPoint, it will trigger to the third-party system and reflect back to Identity Now. Let us understand how event triggers are different from API. The biggest difference between event triggers and APIs is how data is accessed. Requesting data with an API is an active process, whereas receiving data from an event trigger is a passive process. Clients who want to get the latest data with an API must initiate the request. Clients who subscribe to an event trigger do not need to initiate a request. They are notified when the event occurs. In SailPoint tenant, we can see the available event triggers. Based on the customer requirement, we can subscribe to that event trigger. In the upcoming slide, I will explain how to subscribe to an event trigger. In this slide, let's discuss on types of event triggers. There are two types of event triggers. Those are response required and fire and forget. Response required. For response required triggers, it will be using an asynchronous response type. It will specify how long SailPoint's cloud service should wait for a 200 response before timing out in the response deadline field. The duration format is ISO 8601, which is used for this event trigger. The default response deadline for this event trigger is 1 hour. Under response required, we have three sub-event trigger types. Those are access request post approval, access request dynamic approval, and access request pre-approval. Coming to the fire and forget. The only job of the fire and forget event trigger is to forward each event it receives to each subscribing service. This trigger type doesn't wait for a response from subscribers. It has no way of knowing whether subscribers actually received the event, and it doesn't have any mechanism for resending events. We have many event triggers, like example, identity created, saved search completed, and source created, etc. In the next slide, let's have detailed discussion on response required event trigger and fire and forget event trigger. Let's have a discussion on response required event trigger in this slide. Response required event trigger allows two-way communication between trigger service and the subscriber. This trigger is also known as bidirectional trigger because we send trigger to external webhook and we wait for the response. When some update is happened in Identity Now, then it will trigger to the external webhook. For example, the access request dynamic approval event trigger will send the subscriber details about the access request, and the subscriber may respond to the trigger with the identity ID to include in the approval process for an access request. When we trigger to the external webhooks, we will wait for the request response from the webhooks. Once we receive a response to Identity Now, then we consider that this trigger is completed. As you see here, for response required trigger, we can only have one subscriber per event. In this slide, let's have a discussion on fire and forget event trigger. A fire and forget event trigger only supports one-way communication with subscribers. This trigger is also known as a unidirectional trigger because it will not wait for the response from the webhook. Fire and forget event trigger job is to forward each event it receives to each subscribing service. This trigger type doesn't wait for a response from subscribers. It has no way of knowing whether subscribers actually received the event, and it doesn't have any mechanism for resending the events. In this case, we will trigger and we consider that this trigger is successful. As you see here, for fire and forget triggers, it can have a maximum of 50 subscribers per event. Here we will know the available event triggers in IdentityNow. IdentityNow have many event triggers. In that, under identity, there are three event triggers. Those are identity created, identity attribute change, and identity deleted. Under source, we have source created, source updated, and source deleted. And in the same way, under accounts, we have account disabled, account aggregation completed, and account collected for aggregation. And for the virtual appliance, there is only one trigger which is named as VA cluster status change event. In Access Review, there are four event triggers like campaign activates, campaign ended, campaign generated, campaign signed off. For provisioning and search, we have only one event trigger type for provisioning completed and scheduled search. These event triggers have capability to communicate with the external appliances. This response can be happen via webhooks. In the next slide, we can discuss briefly on available event triggers under each event trigger. Here we see the available event triggers under identity. Identity attribute changed. It is a fire and forget event trigger. When one or more attributes change from identity now like department, job title, display name, then identity attribute changed event occurs and it doesn't wait for a response. Identity created and identity deleted is also a fire and forget event trigger types. Identity created event occurs when a new identity is detected during an aggregation and refreshed from the truth source. New identities are detected when an account from the truth source is not correlated to an existing identity. The identity created event contains all of the identity attributes as they are configured in the identity profile. So this is about the types of triggers that comes under identity. In this slide, let's have a discussion of available event triggers under source. Under source, we have source created, source updated, and source deleted. All these event triggers are fire and forget event trigger types. Source created event occurs when a new source is successfully created via the admin UI or the API. Source account created fires after a source is created in the tenant. Source updated event occurs when configuration changes are made to a source, and source account updated fires after a source is updated. The source deleted. This event occurs when a source is successfully deleted via the API or admin UI. And when this triggers when a source is deleted from the UI. Let us understand about the available event triggers under certification campaign in this slide. The campaign generated events occurs when a campaign has finished generating and moves to the preview ready state, which is a step before activating the campaign. When a new campaign is created in SailPoint Identity Now, it will start in the generating state. Campaign generated triggered when a campaign finishes generating. The campaign activated event occurs after a campaign is activated. In the same way, the campaign ended event occurs after a campaign is completed. After completion of campaign, we can download the campaign reports and we can review the result of the campaign. Let's have a discussion of available event triggers under access request. Access request submitted event trigger is a response required event trigger. For access request submitted event trigger, the trigger will event to the external webhook and the subscribing service can use this information to make a decision about whether to approve or deny the request. To approve an access request, the subscribing service responds to the event trigger. In the same way, to deny an access request, the subscribing service needs to respond to the event trigger. Access request decision. This event trigger is also a fire and forget event trigger. For access request decision, event trigger doesn't wait for the response whether the access request has been approved or denied. In this slide, we see implementation of event triggers. The event triggers in this section are generally available to all the IdentityNow tenants. The Event Triggers tab in the Admin section of IdentityNow. The first page is a list of your tenants' available event triggers, and to select, click on the plus subscribe button beside a trigger to subscribe to that particular event trigger. Let's have a discussion of implementation of event trigger. From the available event triggers, we can subscribe to the event trigger which we require. We need to provide the subscription name, description, and we need to choose the subscription type. Next, we need to provide integration URL and the authentication type. In subscription type, we have HTTP and Amazon Event Bridge. First, we understand about HTTP subscription type in the next slide. Understand about HTTP subscription type. HTTP subscription type sends via post method. This API creates a new subscription to a trigger and defines trigger invocation details. The type of subscription determines which config object is required. For HTTP subscription, we need to provide the URL of the webhook in the integration URL field. For authentication type, select None, Basic Auth or Bearer Token. If you select Basic Auth, enter your username and password for the integration service account. And if you select Bearer Token, enter the Bearer Token used for the authentication in the integration. Let's have a clear understanding of AWS Event Bridge in this slide. Amazon Event Bridge is a serverless event bus service provided by Amazon Web Services, which allows you to connect different AWS services, third-party SaaS applications, and custom applications using events. It simplifies the process of building event-driven architectures and enables you to create event triggers and automate actions based on events in a highly scalable and flexible manner. SailPoint Event Triggers provide the tools to quickly create automated workflows and tailored integrations to build an identity security solutions which easily embeds in the existing business process and applications. SailPoint and Amazon are working together to create a simple way to extend the governance platform using an event bridge which provides a wide number of ways to react to events without requiring a significant amount of coding or development work. Here in this slide, let's know about the Amazon Event Bridge subscription type. It's a subscription type which sends events to Amazon Event Bridge service. Here we need to select AWS region from the drop-down menu for supported regions. Enter your AWS account ID in the provided field. Next in the down, select the Enable or Disable button to enable or disable the subscription. Select Save to subscribe the event trigger. If you enable the subscription, the event trigger is live and will notify to the third party system when that specific event occurs in IdentityNow. After you have subscribed to an event trigger, we see a new subscription is added to the subscriptions page. From the subscriptions page, select the Enable or Disable button to enable or disable the subscription. Select the menu icon beside a subscription to edit an existing subscription. If you want to delete this current subscription, you can click on the Delete button. If you want to view the activity log for that specific trigger, you can click on the Activity log. Select Test Subscription to send a test of this trigger using a mock data. If you select Activity log in the left menu to see a complete list of activity for all subscriptions in your organization. Successful executions are stored for at least 24 hours and unsuccessful executions are stored for at least 48 hours. Let's see a real-time use case in this slide. Our target is to create a request in ServiceNow instance when the user is terminated from the organization. So we can track the user status based on identity attribute cloud lifecycle state. And we will make use of identity attribute change event trigger and create a request in ServiceNow instance. Here we see the example of identity attribute changed in this slide. Identity attribute changed event occurs when any attributes aggregated from the truth source differ from the current attributes for an identity during an identity refresh. In this example, we can see user's identity attribute changed event triggered. User Smith-Win cloud lifecycle state is changed from active to terminated. Let's have a detailed understanding of filtering events. First of all, we will know about the filter. Filter in the context of event triggers typically refers to a condition or a set of criteria that you can define to specify when an event trigger should activate. Filters help you narrow down the scope of events that will trigger a particular action. They allow you to be more selective about which events should initiate automated process. Benefits of using filters. By specifying filtering criteria, you can ensure that event triggers are precise and only respond to relevant events. This precision minimizes false positives and unnecessary actions. Constructing a filter. Event trigger filters are constructed using a JSON path expression. In the next slide, we will have a understanding of expressions that to be used in an event trigger to filter. In this slide, we will understand about the operators that can be used in a trigger filter. Some of the important expressions I have taken in this slide are dollar symbol which can be used for root element to query and the symbol used for current node being processed by a filter predicate. Here you can see the example in the given table. And the next is a dot or a full stop which is used as a child operator. And the star can be used for wildcard. And the question mark with closed braces symbol used for filter expression. In the next slide, we know about the function. Let's understand about the functions. Functions can be invoked at the tail end of a path. The input to a function is the output of the path expression. The function output is dictated by the function itself. There are only two functions present in the event triggers. One is length, which is used to provide the length of an array, and its output type will be an integer type. Here you can see the example in the given box. And the next is concat. Concat is used to concatenate two or more paths into a single string value, and its output type will be a string type. You can see the example in the given table. In the next slide, we will understand about the different types of operators present in the filters. Let's understand about the operators and the examples I have used. Some of the important operators I have taken in this slide. Basically, operators provide more options to filter adjacent structures. Let's see different types of operators. First one is equal to, which is used for comparing values or conditions within the context of event triggers logic. And the second one is not equal to operators, which is used to check for inequality. It's used to determine if two values or conditions are not equal to each other. And the greater than value operator evaluates to true if the left operand is greater than the right operand. It works on strings and numbers. Greater than or equal to operator evaluates to true if the left operand is greater than or equal to the right operator. Similar way, less than operator evaluates to true if the left operand is less than the right operand. And less than or equal to operator evaluates to true if the left operand is less than or equal to the right operand. And the regular expression evaluates to true if the left operand matches the regular expression. In the coming slide, we will understanding about the filtering events. If we want to send some part of data, if there is a lot of changes happen to identity, but we want to send only department data to external system called webhook. In this scenario, we use filtering events to know only specific event data. If we don't use filtering, a subscribing service would be sent every single event that the event trigger receives. In this slide, we are going to see about testing triggers. It's important to test your trigger subscription configuration with your actual subscription service before enabling your subscription for production use. Testing subscriptions ensures that your subscribing service can successfully receive events and that you are receiving the correct events based on the filter you have provided. And that's it from this presentation. If you have any questions, please drop your questions in the comment box. Please follow our socials for more technical updates. Thank you.